Hello, this is Greg and Pete, and we're back with Roger Mitchell, author of Zardoz Speaks to You, How a Classic Movie Was Created, Died, and Was Born Again. I have a copy here, but it doesn't show up really well because I've got my background on.
Just hold it right in front of you because it's not cutting you, but it's cutting the background.
There's a good one.
Anyway. Oh, he's got one. There.
That's by chance, folks. I have
By
a
chance.
copy myself here. You know, it
Yeah.
seems like an awfully good read.
And he's
Oh,
joining us
yes.
from Ireland. Where about in Ireland?
I grew up in Limerick,
Limerick.
which is down. There's Ireland, and Limerick is sort of down there somewhere. And Limerick is a place of rain and drizzle. And walking past the Savoy Cinema one day when I was supposed to be going home on the bus, I saw this weird poster with this weird guy standing on a hand. And I thought, I've got the choice of going home on the bus or seeing this film. Little did I know this would lead me, essentially 50 years later, to talking to the host, the co-host, and all the masked maniacs of the world out there about the book that I wrote about the damn thing.
Well, goodness, that was
But
actually
John is good. Sorry.
you actually started answering my first question, which was just the introductory question of how did you get I sort of interested to obsessed with the movie Zardoz, and it was seeing it at an impressionable age, I guess.
Mm,
But what
mm.
what happened after that? How did it grow? Your interest in the film grow?
I think your point about being at an impressionable age is very, very important because when you're about 14, you feel fairly sophisticated, you know, and you can go to the cinema on your own. You don't need your mother with you, but you don't necessarily feel the need to understand everything. I think at about 14 and younger, you're able to see something rich and strange without demanding that it be understandable. And of course, one of the things about Zardoz that I always say, if you can trick somebody into watching the damn thing twice, then they're hooked for life. If they only see it once, they're going to be saying to you, well, what was, rather like the effect that 2001 A Space Odyssey has on a lot of people. You see it again and you go, oh, I see how this connects. I see where this is going. I see actually how it is a message. A lot of it is a message that relates even now today. And this is one of the things about Zardoz. It was such a disaster for so long. Zardoz was on so many worst film of all time lists. And it swung around, and people going, actually, this damn film, it relates to today. So I saw the thing by accident in a cinema in Limerick, the Savoy Cinema, now demolished, as all cinemas have been. And I went to school and I just said, this is the weirdest. I've got to see it again. Told all my friends. And of course, by the following Saturday, it was gone because Zardoz opened big everywhere. Looking at the paperwork, you can see that Zardoz opened big everywhere, as it would being a Sean Connery film. And then within days, it would fall over a cliff. That no longer happens because of the internet, because of streaming, because of so many midnight movie performances. People have been exposed to it. People have seen it twice. I went to college. I went to film school in England. My desire to be a filmmaker partially created by our dear friend Zardoz, because a film that amazes you at a certain age can have a strong effect on you. I had to do a college thesis about something. And, everyone to suck up is doing Citizen Kane, which is a lovely film. Certainly is a nice film. And I did Zardoz partially because nobody else had heard of it, and partially because everybody else that had heard of it hated it. And I was very lucky. See, now this was 1982, 3, that sort of time. Now, for me, this was a film from my childhood. a bit like, oh, you know, someone ought to write a book about the Wizard of Oz. That's an awfully good film. Or to the people I went to interview, and I went and interviewed the director, the designer, the editor. I was able to reach these people. For them, it was something, it was a collective, enthusiastic, weird enterprise they'd been involved in like 9 years before. You know, that's no time at all. To me, it was half a lifetime ago. To them, they were going, yeah, well, I did this, this, and this. Do you want to see this drawing? You want to see this photograph? You want to see, here's the script, you know? They were really enthusiastic about it because people who made the film, they knew they were making something kind of peculiar. I mean, it was damn peculiar from the beginning, but they were dead keen to talk about it. And I was very lucky to talk to some people then who have since died. And I was very lucky to talk to people like John Boorman, who wrote it, produced it, directed it, put some of his own money into it when the damn thing went over budget. The designer, Tony Pratt, absolute genius. He was the guy that came up with this gigantic floating head thing, which we'll talk about later. And a guy who nobody has ever heard of, a guy called Bill Stair, who was an artist and writer who had worked with John Boorman on many films before, like Point Blank and Deliverance, Hell in the Pacific. He was an ideas guy. He was a drawing guy. He was a designing guy. I can tell you more about him later, but very, very pleased to have met Bill Stair, Tony Pratt, and John Boorman particularly, because they were the hearts of Zardoz and where it came from and how it got to us.
Wow. So you keep anticipating my questions because
sure, yeah.
my next question about the book was going to be about all the people you interviewed, because you really have interviews with just about anybody who was involved with the film. There's probably some production assistant in there, and so I was wondering first how you got to them. Apparently, you started early. I wouldn't have guessed you had started the research that early.
I mean,
but
it wasn't going to be.
I was going to ask is, was there anybody that you weren't able to talk to that you wanted to?
Yes,
maybe because they passed on, or
yes, or because they were playing golf. You know,
and who was that?
And who was that? There's one particular culprit here. No, the thing is, Connery, and I've talked to John Boorman about this. He said that Connery's life was practically destroyed by the amount of attention, by the amount of adulation, by Japanese guys with cameras crawling under under the door of a public toilet to try and photograph James Bond. You know?
Oh my God.
Yeah. During You Only Live Twice, the Japanese people were immensely enamored of James Bond, and they would do anything to get at him. And it nearly drove him completely mad. Connery had quit Bond, but of course, then people were offering him, hey, you know, do you want to go to Marrakesh to shoot a James Bond ripoff? And he's going, no, I don't. I'm an actor, you know. And I've met many as an actor in my time, and there are two types of actor. There's the one who becomes a new person, the person they're portraying, the Meryl Streeps of the world, becomes and is almost unrecognizable at times from themselves or from a previous role. There's another type of actor, Spencer Tracy, Humphrey Bogart, Margaret Rutherford, who are themselves, and you're so delighted to see them. But every actor I've ever met has said, look, give me a challenge. I can play James Bond. I can play a small Irish leprechaun sitting on a toadstool. I can play a dog. I can play a chair. Let me show you all the things I can do. And that was what was driving Connery completely nuts. But the publicity that he had drove him away from talking to people about how he felt about things. You know, he would give the interview, oh, yes, a wonderful time, wonderful director, terrific crew, a marvelous story. How he felt about things, he was never going to tell people. That was completely private. So I wrote years ago to Sean Connery. Of course, I never heard from him. I tried to get hold of Charlotte Rampling. Now, both of those people are represented in the book. I managed to find some quite rare interviews with them, including one with Connery talking about his issues with anger and his issues with dealing with women in a way that was not related to sexuality. And this was from a very rare interview that it took me 20 years to find in some magazine that had been printed in, 1969 or something like that. So I wasn't able to get hold of Connery. I wasn't able to get hold of Charlotte Rampling. Who else? Oh, one person I was really sad I couldn't get hold of was a guy called Jeffrey Unsworth, who was the lighting cameraman on the film. And he was most famous for doing 2001: A Space Odyssey. I can talk to you more about Unsworth's contribution to the film later, but it would have been very nice to talk to him. But I talked to his camera operator, Peter MacDonald. He went on to be a director, particularly a second unit director. He did second unit on Tim Burton's Batman. He was up there, and I tell you a funny thing. Every single person I actually talked to were still enthusiastic about this film, were still pleased that they had done it, even though it had been, at the time, a critical disaster. But they were all really, really keen on being directed by John Boorman, on being in one of his films, and in being in a film that had such imagination and scope. And as Boorman says, there's too much in it. Boorman said to me, he said, I put every idea I could think of into this film. He said, it's no wonder people can't get through it, because there's just one idea after another after another. And one of the things I say in the book is, quite often the most important things that build the story are referred to very quickly. They kind of whizzed past you. One thing I can say is that Boorman had final cut. Now, most directors do not have final cut. A number of directors and producers who find that because the studio paid for their movie, they deliver it, and the movie goes, this is a bit too long. Perhaps we'll cut the end off. There's a film called Phase 4. Brilliant film.
Oh.
Yeah, ants are taking over the world. The entire last section of that film was just removed by the studio, who didn't like it, and they put something else in. Boorman himself had made a film called Hell in the Pacific about an American soldier, a Marine, and a Japanese soldier who end up marooned on an island during World War II. Can two people who hate each other so much actually form any sort of mutual understanding? By the end of the film, they have. The producers tacked on an explosion that they bought from somewhere, killing the soldiers. And Boorman didn't even know they'd done that until he went to see the film in London. And in his film, these two guys build this friendship and are then killed in an explosion that wasn't in his cut of the movie. Now, from then on, he swore he would never make another film where he didn't have final cut.
Similar,
well, when somebody,
similar to David Lynch after Dune.
Yeah, absolutely. Lynch is an artist, and Lynch said, I'm not touching this hot potato again until I have, but if you have final cut, who can say to you, that bit,
Yeah.
or perhaps a little bit more explanation or I don't know. But listen, I want to know more of these questions you've got, because to be absolutely honest, you wind me up and I'll just go for 40 minutes. So what have you got, and what will I be embarrassed to answer?
I'm gonna let Pete ask some questions, which will probably be movie specific, I'm guessing. Come up with something, Pete.
I did look at your preview of the Amazon on Amazon there with the book, and I noticed in the opening that you actually have a quote from Kurt Vonnegut, one of my top 3 favorite authors, from Cat's Cradle, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, because Cat's Cradle, I think it has a bit of synergy between that and Zardoz. Do you see that?
Zardoz is interesting that essentially Boorman was a science fiction reader, very big on Kurt Vonnegut, very big on John Wyndham, all sorts of influences thrown in there. Yeah, I think the Cat's Cradle thing, I think that, that does hold water. The number of influences in it. There's a guy who helped me enormously with source material and library stuff. He at one point wanted to write a chapter for me on influences. In fact, it didn't happen. I tell you one thing, when you send your manuscript to the publisher and they say, boy, we like this manuscript, but we cannot print a 700-page book. Okay, things have to get chucked.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are certain it says in the book, Man and Superman by George
Okay.
Bernard Shaw is not about Superman.
Hmm.
So John Boorman's aunt, when he was little, didn't know that, and she bought him a book called Man and Superman, thinking it was about Superman. He read George Bernard
Oh, great.
Shaw, and he started reading lots of George Bernard Shaw. And there's one George Bernard Shaw book where you've got a race of immortal people who spend their time controlling and fooling the short-lived people outside by appearing as gods to them and controlling them. So there's all sorts of things I'm sure there's loads of stuff in there that I've never spotted just because I haven't been exposed. You've probably read loads of stuff that you'll say, actually, yeah, there's a parallel as well.
Oh yeah. In fact, I happened to write a blog post about Zardoz myself on Sean Connery's 90th birthday. Which, as you know, Sean Connery passed away only days later after that posted. Wouldn't you know it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I did
That's
point
a
out that
poison
there was
pen
a
letter.
number. Huh?
That's a poison pen letter.
Yeah, I know. I'm famous for that too. You wouldn't believe how many times that's happened.
Perhaps I
But
shouldn't be talking
anyway,
to you.
yeah, I pointed out there's a lot of influences you can track down. Robert A. Heinlein, for one, did a whole lot of immortality is a theme that if you even have it as a person, there's themes there where humans weren't intended to be gods. So when you get immortal enough, then you get bored in the long term. Robert A. Heinlein did that a lot with his Lazarus Long character. There's really the H.G. Wells time machine is another thing that I think kind of synergizes with Zardoz, because the time machine has the separation of society into different characters in the future, different tribes, as it were. Morlocks versus Eloi, if I'm pronouncing them right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, there's a whole bunch of that stuff. You can kind of trace down a few influences from Asimov's work, and all this stuff was published work at the time. So I think that might have been Borman's some of Borman's reading. But most telling of all is when Borman originally wanted to do Lord of the Rings, and they turned him down for that.
He didn't really want to, but it was offered to him.
Oh,
it wasn't his idea to do it.
Okay.
He was offered it, and he thought, this is pretty good. This is a pre-sold audience, and I mean, he will have read the thing already. Pardon me, drinking absinthe there. Yeah, he was offered it, and he said, yeah, I could sure do that.
So what happened to that?
What happened was he brought in a guy called Rospo Pallenberg, who was a guy that he knew, he was an architect, Italian guy, and he had a mind, Boorman felt, that could take very complicated situations and just by dropping out a character, by dropping out a scene, by compressing things, by turning things around, squash it down. Because you understand, he was going to be making one movie. He was going to be taking 3 books of Lord of the Rings and making them into one movie. So in essentially 1.5 hours, that's half an hour per novel. It's essentially impossible.
No.
So he and Rospa sat down, they bought 2 copies of the book, and they tore every page out and they stuck them on the wall. They could read the whole damn book and said, well, we need that bit, we don't need that bit, we need that, we don't, we need it. I've read it, and Boorman himself says, thank God that Peter Jackson made his film. Partially because of the length of the thing, but
Yeah.
partly because of special effects. Borman's plan, how do you do the hobbits? Borman always replaced his dialogue. Borman would always re-record the dialogue, as films to this day do, because an aeroplane went over, or because when you think about it, you're shooting a scene. You might shoot Charlie on Monday, you might shoot Billy on the other side of the scene 3 days later with a refrigerator running in the background. And how do you get get it to sound like one performance so you can redo the dialogue
Oh.
for the whole thing? Borman's plan was, if he hired children to be the hobbits, made up, and put adult voices on them. Now you see, you're going, not too sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, not too sure about that. Borman knew a lot about special effects because when he worked in Hollywood on Point Blank, which was his first feature film, he was working at MGM. Now, MGM had made The Wizard of Oz. MGM had made. I was watching a Tarzan film. I'm pretty sure it was an MGM Tarzan film the other day, and purely using opticals, they were getting live lions to attack and cling onto the faces of live elephants. How the heck did they do that? Anyhow, the point is, he was there at MGM in the last great days of MGM when all the old guys were still there. And he was sucking in this stuff of special effects. You can make a model of something. You can get a mirror. You can scratch some of the mirror off, and then you can reflect the set while looking through the hole. All sorts of clever stuff. And Zardoz is covered in these very old-fashioned special effects. But no matter how big your budget was, trying to do the Lord of the Rings back in 1969 or whatever the heck it was, it couldn't have been anywhere near as what we see in the Peter Jackson version. Yeah.
Right, which is why I guess they tried animation first, which seemed like it would be promising with Ralph Bakshi a couple of years later. So, Pete, do you have more questions, or I can come up with some if you don't?
Pete, I'm going to
It's your turn.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you. We were talking about influences on the film.
Oh.
The original, you both seen the film.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody out there has seen the film as well.
Religiously.
You'll go to hell. The original script starts off with an airship flying along.
Well,
and
yeah.
At that point in the script, it was Lee Marvin. You can imagine that. Lee Marvin is inside a coffin in an airship. And he comes out of the coffin and he says, "Where am I?" And he looks out the window and you realize you're flying along. You're in an airship. Okay. The guy that designed Zardoz couldn't. Now, Tony Pratt had worked on 2001. He had worked on 2001 until Stanley Kubrick fired him. Tony Pratt can't draw, he said. Anyhow, so, but he said he couldn't work out, how do you design a futuristic airship that doesn't look like something out of 2001 with buttons inside and control rooms and, like fins and anyhow. I don't know. Are you in America aware of a thing called Thomas the Tank Engine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Thomas the Tank Engine is a train and he's got a happy face on the front. Anyhow, this designer, Tony Pratt, he suddenly thought, what do I do with this? And he thought, could the face of the god be kind of on the front of the airship? And he suggested it to Borman, and he said, no, just make the whole thing a face, make the whole thing a head. Now, this does something really weird because...
Oh, you have one.
I have one. Now, the point is, the human brain is designed to communicate with a face. Yeah. So if you put a face there, now you're thinking, well, that guy, is he angry? Is he sad? What does he want? What does that intelligence want? And suddenly, what had been an airship in the script, it's now a character. It's now a
Yeah.
character with a personality. And then you think, oh, I'll get all of the exterminators that follow this god, and I'll give them the same face. And worse than that, I'll stick the face on the front and the back. It takes away their individuality, but it makes them part of this god body. Anything that an exterminator does is what
Yeah.
God would, because they are God themselves in a way. So this weird thing. Imagine Zardoz with just like an airship. It doesn't have nearly the impact. There's something
Oh
about
no.
gigantic personality floating around out there.
He's got another Zardoz head.
He's got, well, this was actually to demonstrate the thing I was going to say to you. There's an amazing thing about Zardoz fandom that
Okay.
there
All
are
right. He's got the
you can
models.
you can buy little guys, yeah. And a friend of mine made that.
Okay.
You can find, if you go on various websites, you can find Zardoz things, you can find badges and belt buckles, and you can find t-shirts. And yeah, the point is, none of that stuff is licensed. The studio has never done anything with Zardoz. When you think about the amount of stuff for Iron Man, the Batman, the Star Wars, you think of all that stuff, they licensed it. There was this enormous desire. They thought they could push it, they could get loads of money. For Zardoz, there's never been anything. There's
Wow.
one novel and there's one trading card, which I'm sure is a pirate. So that just talks about the strength of the fans' love of this film, that they will make stuff. They say, well, there's no stuff. I'll have to make stuff. I'll have to make my own videos. I'll have to make my own, whatever the heck it is. I'm going to show you one thing. I'm sorry, this is ignoring your questions completely.
No, no, you're fascinating.
I'm not. Oh, I'm not fascinating. Back when I was a student, so I did this thesis, and I thought I want a good front cover for the thesis. I want me talking to an intelligent diamond, a giant diamond, a crystal, just like in the film. Okay, so I've got a friend of mine. He's going to come over. He's going to photograph me holding the crystal. But I didn't have a crystal. Now, where the heck do you get a giant crystal that you can hold in your hand with 3 days' notice? Cheap. And I was racking my brains. And it was the Friday night, and the guy was coming over on the Saturday morning. And I thought, how the heck? And I suddenly stopped and I thought, and I'm in a rented flat, right? I'm in a rented flat, student flat. And I thought, just look at the doorknob of my bedroom.
Huh.
That is
Okay.
the doorknob from my bedroom when I was a student. And if you look under there, you can see there's a circle on the underside of it where I sold it off the door. So I'm just saying, Zardoz fans are mad enough to cut their own doorknobs off for this film. Just
Oh
remember.
wow. Oh yes.
Just remember.
So that actually brings up a question.
A legitimate question.
Yes, do you have any rare pieces of memorabilia from the actual film?
I have one
Sure you
thing
do.
here. I have one thing here, which is a treasured thing. This is the original shooting script. This was used in the cutting room by the editor and by his assistant, and it was given to me by a wonderful guy called Alan Jones, who was the assistant film editor on the film. He moved on to do Pink Panther movies. He was an assistant film editor, and on his next film, I think after Zardoz, he was assisting, and the editor got sick, and Blake Edwards said, "Oh, we don't need another editor. This guy's really good. We'll keep it." So suddenly he was an editor. He got his union ticket and all that kind of stuff. Now this here, which I was showing you, is the very, very few exterminator masks left in the world. And that I got, I chatted up the guy who was running the film studios where it was shot years ago when the place was actually closing down. It had gone bankrupt. And I said to him, look, if there's anything left from this film there. And he got me. In fact, you can see the back. The back isn't quite so good. The back is a little bit distorted. But he got me two halves and I joined them together. But that, when the
Oh.
house is burning down, this is
Huh.
one of the things that goes out the window with me.
What's that? What's the material? What's it made out of? Plaster?
Well, it's very light stuff. It's vacuum formed, vacuum formed plastic. Because the film was made essentially for $1 million. Now, Stanley Kubrick he eventually didn't have a budget of $10 million, but he eventually spent $10 million doing 2001. So Zardoz, which was made later, had essentially $1 million, and a quarter of that went on Sean Connery's salary. So you're trying to make a film with so many ideas, with so many special effects, with so many, with the way it looks, because nothing looks like Zardoz. You've got really good people there making a film on absolute peanuts. As good as that, terrific. So anyhow, it's very surprising that has survived. John Boorman's got one. There's one in a museum in America. I don't know. There probably aren't any. But they're easy. So those are the things that I've got from the production.
Wow, that's amazing.
I will say, for potential purchasers of the book, there are a lot of behind-the-scenes photos and artists' renderings and so forth in the book. It is, are these actual storyboards, or are they recreations that are in here?
No, those are Tony Pratt's storyboard. Yeah. And he said to me, John used to really like my storyboards. He said, because he said that they helped him nod off at night. But the thing is, you've got to have storyboards particularly for any special effects sequence, just so that everybody knows what they're doing. Is this thing coming in from the left or is it coming in from the right? Is it shot against a blue background or a green background? Where are the people? Are they models? All that stuff you have to storyboard, particularly effects sequences, and they did. It was a small budget film, but it had absolutely top quality people doing it. It had the big stars. It had Connery and Rampling. It had a Oscar-winning cinematographer, and you put them all together, and they created something that has lasted through thick and thin for 50 years.
All right, Pete, do you have time for another question? We have 5 minutes left, and so
Yeah, I'll pass this round.
you'll pass. I'll tell you what. Why don't I get the final question out of the way, and then we'll see if we have time for other questions after that, because we have a traditional final question, non-Zardoz related, that we ask every guest, which is, and you can do it quickly if you want, and we can maybe squeeze in some more Zardoz. But the question is, where is your hometown, which I think we've already determined, and can you recommend a restaurant there?
Limerick and Ireland itself, and I'll be hung for saying this, used to have probably the worst cuisine ever in the history of the universe. Yes, I'm loath if I can remember the name of it. There is a burger place in Limerick, it's on the end of a bridge, just on the edge of town. It's a burger place, and one of the exciting things about it is they give you a box with a light on it, and when your burger is ready, it beeps, and then you have to go down and get the burger. But it's a very good burger.
All right. So we got that out of the way. We can get back to Zardoz questions. So we don't have time for much, but I think maybe a question. One of the things everybody remembers about the movie that's seen it is Sean Connery's costume and the Brutal's costumes. How did that design come about? And did they think it was a really good idea and audiences didn't? Or
first of all, it was a really good idea.
Okay.
Because who else but a super sexual Superman could wear that? Okay. You'd have to be at the top of your game before you could wear that. The other thing, where that came from, the original plan was to hire a guy called Cecil Beaton, who was a really famous designer and photographer, and he was too expensive. And Borman turned to his wife and he said, "Look, I really think you could do it." And she said, "Me?" And he said, "Yep." And she said, "You never know what you're going to get." And he said, "Well, that's exactly it. I don't want something predictable." And it's that simple. She sat down, she just had a budget of a certain, I don't know, £7,000 or whatever the heck it was, and she drew up stuff and she said, "What about this?" They said, "Yeah, go, because we have no time to think about anything else. We're doing the sets, we're doing the actors. We're dealing with Burt Reynolds, who is the star of our film, but
Oh.
he has just had a massive hernia on the set of The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. And with a week to go before we shoot the film, Mr. Reynolds is no longer available. What the heck do we do now? Will I tell you?
Now we know the
Will I
rest
tell
of
you
the
what
story.
will I tell you what they did then? They went to Richard Harris. And Richard Harris said, "Yes, I'll come over for lunch. I'll talk to you." And Richard Harris got drunk and he never turned up. So they rang Sean Connery and they found him on a Scottish golf course. Where else? And he said he'd do it for the price. He said he'd do it for the. He had them over a barrel. He could have asked for twice as much. He said, "I'll do it for the same amount you were going to give Burt Reynolds." And that's why he's in the movie, because they found him with 10 minutes to spare.
All right. That's so we probably could
Was-
have talked for another half an hour, but we are essentially out of time with just a minute left. But boy, Roger, you really just have a infectious enthusiasm for Zardoz, and it's no wonder that you're the one who wrote this book. I can see why now you've written the major work on Zardoz, which is
And the best-
called
and
Zardoz Speaks
well,
to You.
holding it up invisibly really isn't going to work. The only thing I can say to you folks is that my wife says, "Well, now at last you can shut up about it."
Well, we'll see how that works out for her.
Those are her words.
All right. Well, we have less than 30 seconds, so we are going to sign off so we don't have the awkward conclusion that we usually do where people are cut off at the end. So thanks
It's
so much for being here,
delightful.
Roger Mitchell. Book is Zardoz Speaks to You. Thanks, Pete, and we'll see you next week, guys.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.